Hey everybody, it's Nick again for Grayscale Gorilla. I am the Gorilla. Today we're going to do another Cinema 4D tutorial based on a video that somebody sent me. They wanted to know how to do some techniques in this video, and I found a pretty cool technique that we should explore in today's kind of tutorial. So let me show you the video first. So check this out. Let's all watch the video together. This is what somebody sent to me. I thought it was a pretty cool video here. This first stuff is ribbons. We could talk about that some other time, but this is the cool part. The text thing, that got me excited, man. I like the colors and the way it all kind of flies up there. What I wanted to do was roll into Cinema and see if I could pull it off. Let me show you a still too. They have it up here. It's this effect where the letters kind of go one at a time, and then this whole big chunk of glossy letters kind of fly up over it. That got me excited enough to roll into Cinema and see if I could pull it off myself. So this is where I ended up. This is what we're going to do today. We have this, slices of the letters here, and then we have this big glossy thing at the end. So let me just play this real quick, full screen and on loop. And that's pretty much it. It didn't loop on me. But this is what we're going to build today. We're going to use cloner objects. We're going to use some effectors and a spline mask to pull it off. In fact, if you heard those words and you think you know how to do it, why not pause this and see if you can do it yourself? It may be a pretty fun lesson to try. But if not, let's go ahead and let's build this puppy, and let me show you what we're doing. Also, I just want to let you know, after we're done building it, we're going to throw it into After Effects. We're going to add some of these other kind of light effects and glows and blurs and crap like that we have going on here. So if you want to know how to do that as well, we're going to have a second part of this lesson, which will be in After Effects, where we do all the final compositing for this little scene. So without much more talking on my end, well, there's be plenty of talking, but let's just get into the action. We're here in Cinema. First thing we need to do is we need to get that effect where the letters kind of mask on. And to do that, we're going to use splines. The first thing we need is a text spline. And here, you could write whatever you want. I'm just going to kind of recreate what I made there, which mine says bevel. And I think a big, kind of a chunkier font works better. Luckily, Gotham Bold for me works in Cinema. That's kind of what I want. And that's what we're going to use for the final effect. Now, the horizontal spacing we can adjust. I just want to shrink it just a little, just to tighten up the kind of kerning there, or whatever. So that's the first part. The next part, we basically need a mask, kind of a wave shape that's going to mask this out. And if you're familiar with Illustrator and you've subtracted or added vectors together, you're gonna get an idea of what we're going to do. So I'm going to go to my front mode. This is going to be a little cleaner because we're on a front plane, and it's just got, when we draw, it's going to be on the same plane. So in this front mode, I'm going to grab my Bezier curve kind of thing here, and I'm just going to build a wave that is going to go across. I'm going to build it a little bit more funky than that. Let's see if we could try that again. I don't want it to be that big. I want the waves, yeah, more like this. This feels better to me. So this wave, and it could be really whatever you want, just has to be big enough. I'm going to kind of make it oversized. Just needs to be big enough that when, and I'm going to select it back, that it can cover up the whole piece of type. So here's basically what we're going to do. We're going to use this mask to subtract the bevel, and then we're going to animate the mask up to there. In fact, I think we should shrink this mask just a bit, just to get a little bit extra. So there we go. It's going to start here, and it's going to end right there. So let's go ahead and animate that. The first keyframe is all set. We're just going to get it as close as we can without it touching. There we go. This is our first keyframe of the spline. Now we only want to adjust the position, so I'm going to shut off all these other options here. We're only going to adjust position. We're going to set a keyframe, ba-bam. Then we're going to go, let's say we go to around 40 frames or so, and then we move it up to right where it clears the B. Now that it may be a different place for you, but wherever that mask clears your text, that's where you want to set it. And then you want to set a keyframe there, bam. Play that puppy and see what you get. Not too interesting yet, but check this out. We're going to grab in the MoGraph tab here, you're going to get spline mask. And spline mask has, by default, this A unison B, and that's not what we want. If we bring our two masks into here, what it's going to do is, if you look closely, it's adding the bottom mask to the top one. So this all becomes one shape. What we actually want to do is we want to A subtract B. And in fact, we have it a little opposite. We just need to flip our layers here so that the text subtracts the spline, and then we end up with this. So now look what we have. This is closer to the video that we saw, and in fact, it's a little quick. I'm going to actually slow this down. I'm going to move this to maybe 60 frames. Yeah, I think we'll be better off slow. So there's our basic animation. There's our mask for our text. So if we go back into our perspective mode, now what we need to do is basically extrude this mask into a shape. And for that, we're going to use the extrude NURBS. We're just going to dump that mask into it. And you're going to see already when we hit render here, we have kind of what we need, right? There's a few adjustments we need to make. First of all, we don't want it that thick. I'm going to make it maybe 5, maybe 6 meters thick for me, somewhere around there, because we're going to stack a bunch of these up against each other. We don't want them too thick to begin with. That looks okay for me. Next thing we need to do is add some caps right here, these fillet caps. Somebody please email me and let me know how to say that. For me, I'm gonna up the steps on them to give it some more definition in the corners here, but I'm also gonna reduce the radius, something really small, maybe even 2, just to have a little bit of a bevel there on the edge. And that's going to help us when we add reflections and do a bunch of other fun stuff. So there's the basic shape. The next thing we do is we drop this puppy into a cloner object. Now we take this whole deal and we put it in a cloner object, and the cloner object is cloning it, but it's not going the right way. It's going up and down in the y-axis. We actually want this to be 0. We instead want to clone, on the z-axis. There we go. And we want it to go forward, and I'll show you why in a minute. But you want the original one to be in back, and then the clones to go forward. And now I'm just going to move up really close here so I could get an idea of if they're touching or not. That looks pretty close to me. Now, here's 3 copies. I'm actually going to make about 5 copies of this thing. So now we have this nice thick bevel deal, and they're all animating all at once. So we don't want them to all animate at once. We actually want them to start in the back and move forward. And to do that, we're going to use an effector in the MoGraph tab right here. If you have your cloner object selected and then choose an effector, it will automatically be a part of this cloner object. Keep that in mind. So we're going to select it, we're going to go to MoGraph, and we're going to roll down here to Step Effector. And you see some funky stuff went on. Not quite what we wanted, but it is the right effector. This effector will affect each clone separately in a stepped fashion. So you can see here, it's actually scaling each clone bigger and bigger and bigger. That's not what we want. So we need to go into the parameter settings on the step effector here and just shut off scale. We don't want that. What we want is this time offset right here. And you can see when I move that up, I'm going to set it to 17 on my settings. We'll see what that looks like. But now we're getting what we wanted. So if we pause it kind of around here, you're going to see this is the effect we wanted. Each one's coming up at a different time. Bam, 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 bam. Everything's beautiful, right? All right. Then the last thing we need to build for this is it's the casing that goes around it. If you remember in the video here, the colors kind of come up, each color, and then finally this kind of silver casing comes around and makes it kind of a full letter. You can see it down here too. To build that, we already have our bevel thing ready to go, this extrude NURB. Basically, I'm just going to copy and paste that extrude NURB to get an extra copy. So I actually have just an extra floating copy of this extrude NURB. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pull it out front just a little bit, And I'm just going to extrude it way back. And you can see what that's doing is it's kind of building a full case around it. Now, because it's the identical size of the other clones, you're going to start to see some weirdness going on because they're identically on the same plane. What we want to do is make this just a little bit larger than the other ones. And to do that, I'm just going to use the caps. Because the caps add thickness to the letters, I could actually adjust my radius to, let's say, 5. And my rear radius to about 5. And now when we render, you're going to see it's covering up all the spaces. Everything looks beautiful, right? So, and now here's the idea. The bad news is this big cap thing is coming up at the same time as our other clones. And what we want, this big silver thing, let's just call it the silver cap or something. So this is silver, and these are the colors. Okay? Just to keep them separated. This big silver guy here is going to come up later. And to do that, we actually need to just duck down into our timeline real quick and see that there's a difference between our silver keyframes and our cloner object keyframes, which if we open it up are our color keyframes. And basically all we have to do, we don't have to go in and twirl this open and find our original deal. All we have to do is select the silver keyframes only, which you can see those are selected, and then move them down the line. And I'm actually going to move them a little bit further. I just want them to come up very last. And you could barely see here, and maybe I could zoom in so we could see it a little bit better. But you can see the silver is coming up just after our last clone there. We actually want it even later. That is going to be better. So all of our clones fly up. Bam, 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 bam. And then here comes our silver guy to cap it all off, right? So now if we hit render, you can see we have our inside clones and our big outside clone. Pretty freaking cool. That's it for the timeline for now, so we can just move that. And let's start texturing our scene here just a bit. Now, the first thing we need to do is just add some general lighting. Now, you can pull in some lights here and start to move them around and start to just give it some general light. We just need to fill in all the cracks and start to give it some real light. I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to use a light from one of my upcoming light kits that should be out really soon, I do promise. And what this does is it simulates kind of a GI look really quickly, pretty quick render. And of course, I get to show off my light kit, which I'm really excited about. And basically, if you want to follow along right now, unfortunately, the kit's not out yet. I really apologize. I feel like a jerk. I really do. If you're watching this in a month or so, it may be out. But basically, what I'm doing is I'm lighting the scene with a gradient, and everything's looking pretty sexy, right? So that's the only part of the tutorial you'll have to figure out your own. If you want to light it yourself, you're going to have to play around with some lights or a sky dome and play around with some other stuff. But just to show you what we got here, we have just this basic kind of overall look. And once we add some textures to this thing, you're going to see all the reflections and everything that this skylight will have. Let's add some reflections first before we go too much further in the lighting, just so you can see what everything is doing. I'm making a new material, and I'm going to add reflection, and in the texture, I'm going to go to Fresnel, and I have this basic glossy reflection here. It's kind of a white color, pretty grayish. Maybe I'll even make it more white. And this is going to be our silver. This is going to be our outside kind of thing right here. You can see that. Now, the next thing we need to do is color our shader, or color our cloner objects in the center. And the way we're going to do that is with another effector. And if we hold down the cloner object, or if we have it selected, and we choose another effector, like the shader effector, that's going to work as well. And again, by default, the shader effector has scale on. We don't want that. Here's what we do want. We want the color mode to be on. We don't want to use the alpha strength, and the blending mode is fine. So essentially, if you're not familiar with the shader effector, we're going to use the shader effector to control the color of the objects based on a shader. So let's make a new material, and in the color channel, let's roll a gradient. And in the gradient, you're going to set, let's say V. Let's try V out. 2D V, and then we're going to set 2 colors. For me, my money is on like an orange going to like a pink. That's some kind of cool colors for me. That's my shader effector. That's all we need to do. We need to set that gradient, and then we need to drag that puppy into the shader effector. And the last thing we need to do is in the shader effector, we want to go to the shading, and we want to say channel, look at the color of this texture. Bam. So that's what that says. It says, look, that's the color you want to, that's the channel you want to look into. And then you just place the texture in that tab, and it works. Now, we're getting all pink. That's not what we want, right? We actually want it pink to orange. So there's a couple things we could do. We could turn off the tiling in our actual texture. And I think the main thing we need to do is go back into that texture and try out some other patterns. Mainly, I think we should have left it on 2DU and not 2DV. It looks like we solved it. Let's exit out and see our beautiful work here. We have our orange in the back, getting to our bright pink in the front. The only other thing I want to do is flip that so our orange is up front and our pink is in the back. Beautiful. Now, of course, you could have whatever colors you want, and I encourage you to. Yeah. All right, we're looking good. Now, here's what we need to do. We need to add reflections to our bevel here. I'm going to turn up my skylight just so we can see what's going on. It's a little dark. Okay, now we're getting sexy. We need to add the reflection. So how do we do that? It's a little tricky, but follow along. We need to make a new material. This is going to be only for reflections. Now, here's the tricky part. In the color channel, we need to say, go down to MoGraph and say color shader. And what that's going to do is this color shader is going to tell the cloner to look into the shader effector for its color, and everything else will come from here. So in other words, ignore the shader ignore the coloring of this color and look for here for color guidance, right? So when we open this puppy back up, now we only are using this for everything else. Everything except for color. So reflection, same thing. I'm going to set a Fresnel on the reflection, and I'm going to dump this thing right on our cloner object, and you're going to see, holy crap, that's not what I want. It's all white. But when we render, look at all those colors, right? That's what we wanted. So let me flip around so we could see our stuff a little bit better. We have our reflections here at the top. That's looking nice. We have our reflections on the white stuff. That's looking nice. Everything is looking the way we want it, I'm pretty sure. Now, there are a couple things with reflections you need to keep in mind. One thing is, now if you don't have, let's talk a little bit more about reflections before we get into this. Because, like I said, I cheated and used the skylight. We'll be out March. If you want to light your scene with reflections and do it the normal way, what you want to do is you want to pull a plane into the scene like this. You want to grab a new material, drop a texture on it, and make the luminance channel 100% white. And now this white card here kind of acts like a softbox. And if you hit render, you're going to get the similar effect. You're going to have reflections on the top there. But we're actually going to use this card, or I'm actually going to use this card as a front reflector. So I'm going to pull it out front here. I'm going to rotate it around. I'm going to rotate it up and kind of on a diagonal a little bit. And what this is going to do is this is going to act as kind of a reflection card when we rotate the text around and when we do that big camera move, right? So here we are. That's the big card out front. And if you ever played around with studio lighting, you know that reflective materials are all about what's around them, all about the reflection. So now we may have to cheat a little bit more further out front. And the only other thing we would want to do is on our chrome, on our silver material, because our Fresnel is so strong, we just need to turn it down a little bit. So on the reflection tab, just turn down your Fresnel, and that you could see actually what's going on. Right now, There's no reflections in the very, very front of the texture and only on the sides. And that means when we're rotating around the front of our object and we hit render, we're not going to see that card we just placed because the reflections don't work on the fronts. By reducing the Fresnel just a bit, you're going to let the all-white shader come through and you're going to start to see a little bit more reflection. There it is. See that right there? You're going to start to see a little bit more reflection on the front. And in fact, if I dumb it down just a bit more, now we're talking, dude. In fact, I love it so much, I'm going to do it to our other material as well. This is our reflection for the cloner objects, for the middle stuff. I'm going to do the same thing and just drop it down just a hair so we could start to see the reflection card in the front of this material here. Now, let's talk about what else is going on with our reflections. You may be seeing some kind of jaggy edges, depending on how you're viewing this. But you may start seeing like these little funky edges here, and this isn't very sharp. And if you're starting to get that, you want to go into your render settings under anti-aliasing and go to geometry and say, no, geometry, screw you, man. I'm going to best. And what best does is it kind of takes a little bit extra care in rendering reflections. Now, by default, it goes to 4x4. I dumb it down to 2x2. And see how that looks. And if that's not good enough, I go up to 4x4. Because remember, your render time goes up as you start to click all these buttons. That looks better to me. Maybe we jump it up to 4x4 for the final render. But overall, I'm thinking this looks pretty sexy. In fact, let's just try, kind of moving over here. Let's see what it looks like here. Hey, now that's just dang sexy. Let's see what it looks like here. We're going to be maybe over here on the edge. Now that's just beautiful as well. So the last thing we need to do before we head on out to After Effects is, well, first of all, move this reflection card out of the way. It's in the way of the camera move. So I'm just going to move that back. The last thing we need to do is a camera move, right? And in my head, the camera move, and you can see the one I've already built is like this. We're going to kind of start here, and it's going to build. We're going to start close, and then it's going to build, and then we kind of end up maybe low and here, somewhere like that. And in my book, the best way to do these rotation moves that are kind of like this is with a camera attached to a null. So let's just set that up. First thing we need to do is set up our camera. So I'm going to go to the light menu here and pick a camera. Accidentally picked a light. Don't want that. I'm going to get a camera, and I'm going to select this little checkbox thing. Bam, right there. That means I'm looking through the camera, right? And then I'm just going to add a null. And then I parent the camera to the null, which means that when I go into this null object and I start rotating the heading right there, ba-bing, that's 90% of our camera move right there. This is the first thing we're going to animate. So it's going to start maybe here, and it's going to go bevel, right? Let's do it. Here we are. We're at frame 0. I'm going to head back. Now, you can't see the letters for reference, but you can get an idea if you fast forward. It's kind of where we want, maybe even closer with the camera, but we're going to animate the camera later. We're only worried about the rotation right now. So we're going to start here. I'm going to control click on this little dot right here for the heading. Bam. Make sure the null is selected. And then I'm going to go all the way out to 90 frames where the ending is. And in fact, we need to extend our timeline. 3 seconds is just not enough for us. I'm going to extend it to 140 frames. That's just going to give me some extra padding to rotate around. Then I'm going to go somewhere over 100 frames for this move. And then I'm just going to rotate and see where we end up. I think we're going to end up kind of here, but further out. But again, we're going to animate the camera in a second. But only worry about now where you're going to end up rotation-wise. I'm going to go back to frame 100, and I'm going to end right about there for now. You can see our little keyframe thing here is yellow, which means you need to keyframe it basically for this to work, is kind of what that says. So I'm going to keyframe it. And now when we play, starting from the beginning, you're going to say, blue, 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 blue. We got the rotate going, looking good. Now, obviously the camera is not doing exactly what we want. We kind of want it to start close, but then as it goes here, we want it to kind of move out. And for that, I'm just going to animate the camera. I'm going to set a keyframe right where it is. In this case, I'm only setting position and rotation keyframes. Earlier for this null object, we just used this little thing to animate. Now I'm going to use this big keyframe tool. So I want to record all position and rotation. I'm going to select, bam, hit a keyframe. And then same thing, go to frame 100 where this null stops rotating, and then readjust my camera. I'm actually thinking I'm going to be kind of down a little bit, maybe even like that for our final frame up. That looks pretty cool. I'm going to hit a keyframe, and then I'm going to watch this thing. We start here, we do this, we rotate around. That looks pretty good to me. That looks pretty good. So let's check our reflection at different points. So here, we're going to check when it starts coming up. It's a little bright. I'm going to adjust my skylight just a bit. Okay, so there's that. Then we move forward. I'm going to check it here. That looks good. I'm going to move forward. I'm going to check it here. Our chrome looks good. And now we're starting to see our little reflection card over here. In fact, I want that reflection card to kind of stay there for longer. I'm actually just going to move it over. Now, if we move out in our front view, you can see I can actually grab onto the plane and just kind of stretch it out a little bit, make that larger. So now, when I hit render, it's going to go all the way to here. There's our reflection. That looks nice. And then all the way to here. Wonderful. We still have a little bit of reflection on this edge. The last thing we need to do in the scene before we get into the rendering and preparing for After Effects is I'm not 100% happy with the background. I'm just going to pull up on my gradient in my skylight just so I have a darker background just a bit. You can see it's washed out, right? It's not quite as black as I want it. It's not quite as dark. That starts to make the text stand out, I think, a little bit more, personally. So let's just check again some of these reflections. Yeah, these bright reflections now I think are going to stand out a little bit. In fact, I could crank my light back up just a bit. Cool. I'm ready. I'm about ready to rock this thing. Let's do what I always do, which is kind of a little test render. I head on over to my output settings. This is going to be 16 by 9, so I'm going to set it 16 by 9. And this kind of default 320 by 180 16 by 9 is a perfect little test render setting. I'm going to go to frame range, and I'm going to go to all frames. We want all the frames there. And in fact, we don't need the full 140. If you see, our whole animation kind of ends at 100, so we really only need to go to maybe 110 or so, just so you know. But we're going to find that out right now, because what we're going to do is do a test render. I'm going to hit Shift R, and it's going to say, yo, you're not saving this thing. Are you sure you want to render it without saving? And I go, yeah, heck yeah, dude. And I want to, because this is just a test render to see how everything's looking. And with the lighting and stuff we used, it's really not too intensive of a render, so we could just kind of watch it. And what's cool about the picture viewer, again, is you could watch it as it goes. That is looking pretty good so far. And I just sit here and watch it and kind of think about, is this how I want it to look? Is there anything bothering me about it? So far, I'm thinking pretty good. It's a little washed out, but that's what After Effects is for. You know, one of the best pieces of advice I got was get it close in 3D and then tweak all the final colors and everything in your post kind of thing, in your compositor, right? If you try to sit and tweak each color in 3D, you're going to be here all day with the render times and the redos and all that stuff. Get it close, bring it into After Effects, and tweak it there. So overall, I think we're looking pretty cool here. Pretty cool effect. Blah, 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 blah. And then I just want to check the end of the camera move. I want to make sure we have maybe what we'll do is just we'll extend the camera move and make it a little bit slower. So yeah, the reflection's looking good. I do wish you could see how our reflection card goes out of the letters by the time we get all the way around there. So what I may do is set up one more reflection card over here, right there, so we can see more reflections. So you see what I'm saying? This reflection card looks so cool going across it that I think I'm going to set one up over here. So let's do that and then do our final render for After Effects. I'm going to move out. Well, no, I'm going to stay in here. I'm just going to shut off my camera so I don't screw anything up. I'm going to come out here. I'm going to grab my my plane, and I'm just going to grab it, and I'm going to move it kind of over here, rotate it, and kind of move it up and back and over. So it's basically, I'm surrounding the type with these little white cards. And I'm going to have more about this when the lighting kit comes out, because I want to show you guys exactly kind of what this stuff does and how to light your scene really, really well. For now, just know we need more reflections on our little chrome deal. And now if we go all the way over here, we can see that's kind of what we want. We want that to kind of bling out right there, right? You see it? What we don't want is it in the render itself. So let's fix that. We're going to right click and we're going to go to compositing tag and we're going to see scene by camera. No. We're also going to turn off scene by rays because we don't want it to block our skylight. No, I'm sorry. We do want rays. We just don't want scene by camera. We don't want cast shadows or receive shadows. That is what we want. So we shut it off in the scene, and then we have that as well. I think that looks good. Let's do and set up our final render for After Effects. In this case, we don't need a multi-pass render. Now, if we wanted to go in and tweak colors specifically and change the overall look of this, we could export a matte for it. But I've done that in other tutorials you've seen. It's what you use is an object buffer to do that. But in this case, I think we're just going to do a raw TIFF output for After Effects as a TIFF sequence, and then we're just going to color correct it in there and do some fun stuff. So to set that up, the first thing we need to do is set up the output. In my case, I'm going to do 720 by 405. Not HD, but good enough for this tutorial, and we can render pretty quickly and get on with it. You can set this to whatever you want, 16 by 9, all that stuff. 110 frames is still good with me. What I may do is extend this camera move just a bit. Just a bit. Let's look at our keyframes and extend our camera move just a bit. Here's our camera stuff. And actually, they're both in there, the rotation and the camera. So just by selecting one of these, I can actually move it down to, let's say, 120. And then you're going to see the camera really eases in there. Yeah. That looks good to me. So we're going to go all the way to 120. And then the only other thing we need to adjust is our render settings that let us know how far we go. We actually want to go to like maybe 125 just for a little bit of buffer there at the end. And that looks good. Our ratio looks good. Our width is 720. You could be whatever you want. The last thing we need to do is just save this thing. If we save it, it's going to pop up into here. I'm going to go to tutorials. And then I'm going to go to, what do I call this thing? Bevel offset. And I'm going to go to renders, and I'm going to say render 4. You can see I've tried some other versions of this to get it right. And we're going to call this bevel 4 awesome, because I think it's awesome. So there we go. We're saving it. It is a TIFF sequence. We don't have an alpha channel, at least I don't, because I have this background sky object thing going on. Everything else is fine. We're not going to worry about even a compositing file in After Effects because we're just doing a straight TIFF sequence and we're going to color correct the heck out of this thing. So let's just get to the rendering, the important part, and move on. So I'm going to hit Shift R again. and I'm gonna watch this. I'm gonna watch this thing render. I think we're looking good. So while we render, let's take a break. This will be part 1, the Cinema 4D build it part, let's say. And then we're going to continue part 2, which is all the color correction, all the After Effects, all the glows and gloss and all that crap I added to it. That's going to be part 2. That'll be out really soon. In fact, if you're watching this a little bit later, why don't you just see right down below if there's a link to part 2, and I'll see you there where we're going to finish this animation off and make this thing look sexy. So thanks again for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. Bye, everybody.